Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Yup, back again. Let's hear some more real-life experiences /X/files. I was able to sleep before 3 a.m. last night. I do not wish for this to happen tonight. I wish for you to provide me with enough bricks to build a house. No creepypasta. Go, go, go.
It was in Connecticut, but I was so young I don't even remember the town's name. This house was the stereotypical haunted house. Gargoyles on the pillars in the front, a huge creaky old gate with 2 gold-trimmed letter G's on both sides of the gate. I never found out what they stood for. While I lived there, for the short time I did, I was with my grandmother and grandfather. We had 2 pets, our dog Pyro and our kitten Yeti. Besides the usual sitting up all night wondering what you're hearing, seeing shadows move across your room, creaking floorboards, even when everyone else is asleep. This was an evil house. It was felt, even on the brightest of days. Now this wasn't a desolate house either. The next house was less than 50 feet away, but we both lived on the top of a hill and our driveway extended the other way, facing one of the older back roads, not the newer built main roads. This house had been there for a while. So you can imagine how much of a scary house this was at a young age. And being there just made it even worse, no matter how convincing my parents sounded when they told me I should visit my grandparents. I told them I would never go back after my first visit. This house wasn't overdramatic with its evil. It was very subtle and would get to you in any way it could. I would make a sandwich, and the butter knife that I was using would be placed on the other counter, right after you turn your back to it. And all the condiments would be sealed perfectly, almost as if unopened. I would be the only one in the house, using the bathroom with the door open, and the door would swing closed. Not at a high speed, but it would creak closed, and the knob would turn and click. I would hate watching TV in the house because it seemed like every time I would switch channels, the snow static would sound like screaming instead of feedback. I refused to watch television. I wouldn't play outside because there was nobody to play with. There was a lone tree in the back of the house, all the way at the very peak of the hill, with a tire swing attached to the highest limb. One day, I was sitting by the tree reading and the wind was horrible. The wind was blowing very hard and the limbs were creaking on the tree louder than the house's floorboards at night. Suddenly the wind stopped immediately and the tire swing's rope snapped. I turned around the tree to see what had happened and the tire was standing up perfectly. So I started to back away from the tree slowly when the highest limb snapped clear off the tree. It came down with a loud crash, and even when it hit the ground directly on top of it, the tire didn't budge. At this point, I was shitting bricks. I ran into the house immediately, yelling for my grandparents. I was truly freaked out beyond belief. Nobody was home. I found a note on the counter that said they were going to the store to pick up milk and eggs. I crumpled the note up and threw it in the trash can, ran into the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and started yelling at the house, "Enough! I don't know what you're trying to tell me." And I turned around to run out of the kitchen and there was the balled up note, unraveled and magnetized to the fridge, minus the magnet. I grabbed the note, balled it up again, and threw it into the oil lantern on the table, and I heard a loud screech. Pyro and Yeti jumped up and started barking, meowing. The basement door was deadbolted. The house had been designed like some sort of holding chamber. The deadbolt was on the inside of the house, not the inside of the basement. I ran over and locked the chain, for good measure. I ran upstairs with Pyro and Yeti following me as fast as I could, and I heard a loud crash along with the sounds of snapping wood. Something had broken down the basement door. I sprinted up the stairs and slipped, and fell all the way down the stairs. I tried getting up, but something wouldn't let me. Something felt like it had a hold of me. Pyro bit onto my sleeve and tried pulling me up the stairs. When he realized he couldn't pull my weight, he let go and started growling and barking, more furious than Cujo. I finally got back to my feet and ran up to the bathroom, almost as if I had jumped up the entire flight of stairs. I slammed the door closed and locked both locks. I jumped in the bathtub and held Pyro against me. as Yeti was standing on the edge of the tub, hissing. The bathroom door started being slammed against when I finally closed my eyes and let it continue for 5 minutes. It was about then when I yelled, "Stop it! I don't know what you want." And my grandparents answered back to me, "Open the door, tell us what is happening." When I opened the door, I was bleeding, all down my arms. It looked as if I had cut myself. By the night, the wounds were gone, and there was nothing to show anything had happened. The basement door was intact. The swing and tree branch were perfectly fine, except one thing. The basement locks were undone, and nobody had been down there since I had locked both of them. Later that night, I found a trap door under a dresser in my room. I pushed the dresser out of the way and opened it up. It smelled like death down there. Not of flesh, but of rotting vegetables and other foods. I took the oil lantern from my room down into the area, and there were old corn cobs and blood all around. There was a mixture of blood and dirt on the wall, and all I could make out was SEUS. I'm assuming someone wrote "Save Us." I called my father that night and told him to pick me up. My grandparents moved out of the house the next week, and a month later the house mysteriously burned to the ground. No explanation for the fire was found, as it was still my family's property. I'm glad it did. It was an evil place.
I suppose I'll contribute. The only thing really worth noting happened one night a few years back, probably 3 or 4. So I'm asleep in my room and my mom comes in and wakes me up. I was pissed because it was like 2 a.m. on a school night and I wanted to sleep. But there was something different about it. She was scared, like really scared. So I finally get awake enough to find out what's going on. See, at any given point in my life, I've had 3 cats, give or take a few months after one had died. But often we'd leave them out, and when my mom couldn't sleep, she'd come let them in, usually around that time. I thought one of them had been run over. She was so freaked out. She tells me she went to the door and opened it up, and instead of cats or anything, she immediately saw a gigantic black dog in our driveway. She said it was about as high as my dad's truck and wide. She said it was so big she thought it was a car. Then it just looked at her. Didn't bark. Just stared at her. After a few seconds, it eventually turned around and ran off down the street. Of course she was freaked out, so she watched it for as long as she could. If we're standing at the door, we can see 3 streetlights down our street. She watched it as it passed through the first 2, but when it should have gotten to the 3rd, there was nothing. Then she came upstairs and woke me up. I thought she was nuts, but she forced me to go downstairs and check outside. Of course there was nothing there. But the sheer fear she displayed basically made me shit bricks. It takes a lot to get her rattled that bad. I don't think a dream could have done that, but damned if I know what it was.
Aussie here. I'll tell you guys a true story. It's not elaborate or particularly scary, and frankly I don't trust real ghost stories that are very well written. It was a long time ago, so I don't remember it well. A couple of flashes and what my cousin and friends say they saw. Sometimes I wonder if they're just humoring me and didn't see anything. My neighborhood was an estate that was probably started in the late 70s. One of my friends said there used to be an old shack of a house across the road from him. He lived just down the street. So I don't think the area had been lived in for long, but it would appear there had been a previous settlement. My front door was in the side of our house and there was a decking there, then some garden, and then the fence with our neighbor's house fairly close to that fence. I'll estimate an 8-meter gap of side yards between the houses. Both of our houses had been built by us and were fairly new. Our front door was dark brown wood with some glass in the top. Dark, yellowish, frosted stuff that you can't really see through. Next to the door, there's a window from the ceiling to the floor, probably about a foot or so wide. One night when I was maybe 3 years old, we were sitting in the lounge room, which was the first room of the house. It was well lit in the room. I was sitting on the floor with a cousin and a friend of roughly the same age. We were a meter or 2 directly in front of the door. My parents were on a couch to my right, with their back to the front door, talking to some family and friends. I saw what looked like a big white sheet floating above the decking. It traveled past the door, and I can't quite remember what happened then. I think I might have told my parents and been told not to worry about it. My cousin and friends still claim to have seen it also. Years later, we were having a party, and my neighbors were there, and the conversation turned to stuff like our thread here. true ghost stories and such. And they told us how their yard house was haunted and they'd all seen a ghost there. The ghost they described was a woman in a big old-fashioned billowy dress. So maybe my stereotypical sheet ghost was actually her in the big dress. I'm pretty sure my neighbors had never heard my story before that night. Sadly, we no longer own that house, so I can't approach the hauntings with an adult skeptic's mind. But all sorts of weird stuff happened to us there. That was my only personal sighting. My parents have a few, but I don't think they question the alternatives as much. For instance, my father has seen a couple of dead relatives when waking up in bed or walking down the hall in the middle of the night. Half asleep, I've seen all kinds of things. No ghosts, but I know I was just kind of between dreaming and being awake. Nothing paranormal.
I can remember that when I was really young, like 3 or 4 years old, I would be trying to sleep in my room and I could hear something under my floor. It sounded like it was tapping on the floorboards. I would scream for my mom and she would come and lie in my bed for a while. While she was there, the tapping would stop. But when she thought I was sleeping, she would go back to her room and it would resume. I remember this occurring several nights, and it would always stop when my mom was in my room. Eventually, I started to fear my mom being angry more than the tapping, and I just ignored it for several nights. Once I stopped freaking out over it, it went away and has never come back. One other time, when I was probably 14 or so, I was sleeping over at my friend's house. His room was in the basement, and I woke up at some obscure hour in the morning and had to take a piss in the bathroom upstairs. I stumbled through the dark to get upstairs into the bathroom, took a piss, flushed the toilet, and proceeded to wash my hands. Once I had the soap in my hands, I heard what sounded like a really pissed-off woman almost hissing words at me from outside the bathroom in the hallway. I didn't understand anything she said, but I knew that I should be afraid, but wasn't. I finished washing my hands, dried them, walked back down into the basement, and went back to bed with no problem. When I woke up the next day and remembered what had happened, that's when I got bothered by the events of the previous night.
I can't say for certain, but I'm pretty sure my younger brother got possessed once. He went on a camping trip with some of his friends and came back different. He was anxious a lot of the time, had cold sweats, and complained that he wasn't able to sleep. He went to the doctor, but they said he was physically fine. Then he went from mildly ill to, well, crazy. He would accuse me and my sisters of plotting against him, scream curses at our parents, and kept muttering to himself about the coming release. My sisters were completely freaked out, and my parents had aged 20 years over the course of a week. They were so freaked. They had no idea what to do. They thought that if they told anyone, he'd be strapped inside a white van and we'd never see him again. It wasn't until my brother started to get violent that I formed a plan. I caught him standing over one of my sisters, prodding her with a fire poker and giggling maniacally to himself as she bled from cuts on her arm and cried. I came up from behind him and spun him around by the shoulder, cocking back my fist. I remember, as he turned and my fist came forward, I saw his eyes. The pupils were large and black, and his eyes rimmed in blood red, and his grin was wide and soulless. Crazy, I know, but it's what I saw. My punch knocked him down, and I got on top to hit him again. But he said, "What are you doing?" His eyes were normal and the grin was gone. I told my brother to go get some sleep and fixed up my sister's cuts. Then I told her not to worry and to go to spend the night at a friend's house. My other sister was already doing the same, and I called my parents and told them to spend the night at a hotel. They were worried, but I told them to trust me. I grabbed 2 things and approached my brother's room. I could hear him singing in there, in a dark, cacophonous voice that wasn't his own. I took a breath and charged in. He sat up immediately in his bed and looked at me with the same grin and eyes as before. He reached out fingers that were more like claws for my throat, but I smashed him across the face with the Bible I had brought, and the blow knocked him flat, and the beast in him screamed. I sat on his chest and pinned his arms under my knees. Then I started reading. Over the course of several hours, I read every single psalm. He called up to me all the while, pleading with me in a voice of what he sounded like 10 years earlier, snarling at me in some infernal tongue, and howling in agony at the completion of each verse. When I finished reading, my throat raw and barely able to form words anymore, I looked down at him. His eyes were closed, and he was beginning to breathe normally. I set the Bible on his stomach and walked out into the hall. I felt completely drained. I lumbered into the living room, fell onto the couch, and lost consciousness. When I woke up in the morning, everyone was home, and they were having breakfast. My brother was there, and he was normal again, making jokes and good-natured conversation. As I copped out of breakfast and said I was going to go crash in my room, my brother grabbed me by the wrist, looked me in the eye, and said, "Thanks, thanks." He never had a problem again, and over the last year it seems everyone has forgotten that terrible week. As for me, I count myself lucky. I'd never really believed in God, but I sure as hell do now, and it's a damn good thing. When I went to lay down on my bed, I felt something pressing into my back. I reached in my pocket. It was the other thing I'd brought into that room with my brother, a failsafe in case my amateur exorcism failed, a .38 revolver.
Happened to me a few years back. Chinese believe in something called the Hungry Ghost Festival, which happens every 15th night of the 7th lunar month. Children are told by parents to be home early and not wander out at night because it is during this time that the spirits from the other side are lawfully allowed into our world. The Chinese would burn offerings to appease the spirits so they would not bring harm to us. My mum warned me not to stay out too late during this time of the year too. I agreed and went out with my friends to have dinner together. We went to a place which was located near a stretch of private houses. After eating, we were feeling kinda bored, so we decided to take a walk down the street with the private houses. It was kinda like a long, straight stretch of road with houses on either side. It was already around 2 a.m. and we totally forgot about the festival, so we walked down the street. Most of the houses were totally pitch black, with only one or two lit up dimly. And those lit dimly were the front few houses. So we walked, and I just had this weird feeling behind me, the one where you just cannot resist the urge to look behind. So I looked 3 or 4 times behind me, and nothing. No vehicles coming this way, nobody behind us. My friend, A, asked me sarcastically, "What? Are you psychic? Do you sense something?" I got kinda pissed, but what the heck, I guess. We must have walked a good 15 minutes when we came up to this house with a dog near the gate. The dog immediately came up to the gate and barked madly. We were shocked, of course, but continued on, walked past the gate. That's when it set upon us. The dog wasn't barking at us, it was barking at something behind us. Many people believe dogs have the ability to see things we humans can't see, things from beyond our world, etc. And while we walked past the dog, its focus never shifted from that something behind us. I was like, dude. My friends noticed too and told me, shut up and just walk. We quickened our pace and walked a good 10 minutes before coming out of the stretch into a busy main road. I raised the topic, but A told me to just let the matter rest. Never really spoke much of it since, but I figure A must have seen something that day, because after that, he changed a little. He doesn't talk much anymore, and is very unwilling to stay out late at night. Hell, he wants to be home by 9 p.m. every day. I haven't been back to that area since, but sometimes I do wonder what that dog really saw behind us. Can people really sense otherworld beings? I don't know if I really sensed it or I was just being afraid, but I really did feel a strong, constant desire to look behind. Oh well, I guess some things are better left alone.
When I was little, and as early as I can remember, I always saw shadow people. They may or may not have been actual shadow people. The Wikipedia article on them was too long to read, so I don't know much about them, but shadow people is what I called them, because that's what they were. Anyways, my shadow people would always come when I was in bed with the lights out. If I ever looked over at the door, I would see a tall, kinda shapeless but certainly masculine shadow standing there. I was terrified of them, something chronic, but I would stare at it as long as I could. After a short time of staring at me, He would walk directly to my bedside and then lean over me, staring with his head cocked to match my head position. After I couldn't stand it anymore, I would pull the blanket over my head and close my eyes tightly. When I peeked out again, he would be back in the doorway. The cycle repeated until I fell asleep with the blanket over my head most nights. I got the feeling that sometimes it would be a different person every few times he appeared back at the door. Also, sometimes they would just stand at my bedside and not lean over. One night, when I was older, maybe 7, 8, or 9, my childhood timeline is a blur, I was either incredibly brave or just not afraid anymore. When one of them leaned right in to stare me in the face, I reached up to touch him. Before I could, he stood back a few steps. He just stood there looking at me. My usual blanket trick didn't work this time. I rolled over and faced the wall to sleep. From then on, I slept with the door closed. They never acted threateningly and definitely never tried to touch me. I only ever saw them in that house. They looked just like a shadow, only standing freely instead of being stuck to the wall, so they were 2D looking with no depth to them. I'm not sure how I even knew they were looking at me because they didn't have features. I don't remember if they were wearing clothes, but they never had hats or hair. But at the same time, I don't think they were bald. I don't remember ever telling my parents about them. Call it an overactive child's imagination if you want, but they are, or were, real. Also, my mom says I would tell her all kinds of things that would make her shit bricks. Once, I told her that I remembered when I was the daddy and dad was the son. This would imply I was my granddad, who is still alive today. That one I might have made up. I also told her about a man who was called Uncle Ken. He would sit in the corner of my room and talk with me. I described to her what he looked like, and apparently it was an accurate description of her Uncle Ken, who had died some years before I was even born. I don't remember telling her either of these things, and I don't remember them happening, but when she told me about Uncle Ken, I remember a man named Ken that fits the description. Mom is really into her belief in paranormal stuff, but never really told me anything about it unless I asked. After a while of small paranormal things happening to me and my family, I don't know. I get the feeling that I'm invincible. If I ever see something dangerously creepy up close, I'll be afraid all right, but that won't stop me giving it a right hook before it kills me.
When I was a freshman in high school, I was under a lot of stress. It was one of those points in my life when everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I'm sure some of you understand what I mean. I browsed the web for some good stress relief tips, and one of the results I found after some browsing was to take a long walk in the woods to reconnect myself and put things into perspective. At that time, the home I lived in had a few acres of thick woods right behind it, with a creek and a steep hill. Now, before I continue, let me explain just how weird these woods are. My neighbor's cat has walked back there before, and within a week it had died. This seems somewhat normal, but someone a few houses down had another cat that one day got outside and eventually came back to the house with one of those little tiny fishes or something that it had caught out of the creek, and it died too. But me and some of my friends had never particularly been afraid of it. We used to go back there all the time to drink some beers or smoke some pot. So I wasn't particularly afraid, but it did always creep me out. So for lack of a better option, I decided to take a hike in the woods. I take my iPod and I'm on my way. So through my fence, into my backyard, and into the woods I go. When I get to the bank of the creek, I sit my ass down on a log and relax, and I won't ever forget what happened next. Come Sail Away by Styx is playing, but there is that part at the end where Dennis de Jong is singing, "I thought that they were angels, but to my surprise they climbed aboard their starship," or something like that. Well, halfway through Surprise, my iPod stopped playing music and the screen had frozen. And when looking back, I had felt a chill through my jeans, almost as if there wasn't any fabric between me and the wind at all. And then while fiddling with my iPod, it finally dawns on me what is happening. And I ran all the way into my house, and I called a friend of mine, making him promise that if the phone line goes dead or anything, to call 911 and to make sure they all know what really happened. But nothing happened. I didn't sleep at all that night, but nothing happened. Not even so much as the creaks a house makes when it's settling. Just silence. When I dragged my sleep-deprived carcass to school that day, all of my problems had been completely solved, and I've never had to deal with any emotional problems since. To this day, I'm still afraid of what exactly it was that saved me from those dark days of my life, and I am still too terrified to actually walk back into those woods. But I hope it knows just how grateful I am for what it's done, even though I never did get my iPod to work afterwards. This might not be the most exciting or scariest story, but I can swear to you it's true.
Fellow Aussie as well. I used to live out in the country, far out, so that the next house was at least half a mile away. Wake up and see kangaroos in my yard every morning, like that. It was weird at night, either pitch black if the night was cloudy, or lit up like day if the moon was out. There were these big windows in the computer room that looked out over a couple acres and a small marsh. One day I looked up and saw something standing in the marsh. It looked like it was 12 feet tall and really skinny, standing hunched over with its arms dangling down to the ground. And that's not what got me. That thing's head was twitching back and forth, really fast, and every now and then it would shake once, violently, almost like it was going to snap in half. I yelled, "Holy shit!" and knocked over my computer, getting up to see what it was. The second I stepped up to the window, I was trying to figure out if it was a tree or something different. It started racing towards the window, still twitching its head. I think it had horns, but I'm not sure. Either way, I turned around and went right out the door. I heard it running around the side of the house while I was busy trying to get my car door open. It was grunting and moaning and giggling. I get goosebumps every time I think about it. I got more things like that swamp monster story, so I guess I'll just post them. One night, same house, I was standing in my backyard waiting for my dog when I heard this odd noise from the left of me, where the acres and swamp are. It sounds really weird. It's like a high, breathless scream that almost sounds like thin metal grinding together. I knew it wasn't my dog. Nothing normal could possibly make that sound. I thought maybe one of my gutters had fallen down. Fuck it. Wish that was what made the noise. Whatever it was, it goes up until it's virtually ear assault, and then drops down into this bass register snarling. At this point, I'm like, oh shit, calling my dog's name and hoping that he shows up before whatever it is takes a chunk out of me. My dog finally appears, running up the hill towards me, growling, and instead of going into the house, runs off in the direction of the noise. I saw this perfectly well, since the moon was out and it was lit up like daylight. Dog goes running up the field, barking like a mad bastard. Some little thing that looks like a baby or toddler that's been broken up and reformed into a crab-like form comes scuttling out of a patch of weeds and trees right at my dog, screeching and growling. My dog sees it and stops dead in his tracks. I'm screaming his name by now, and as I watch, it latches onto his leg. The dog yelps loud enough to make me flinch, whirls around, and starts running frantically back toward me. The thing falls off when he's halfway back, and we both race into the house. We spent the rest of the night in my windowless bedroom. On another note, he had all this purplish black shit caked onto his leg, but it was gone the next day. More house monster shit stories. I have so many. I got one of my buddies to move in with me, even after he heard the shit that goes on. He thought it was awesome, and I needed someone to help me out in case one of these fucks gets into the house. So we're sitting on the roof with a flashlight and a rifle. We're looking out and waiting for shit to happen. So far, we've seen nothing, but we've heard this weird giggling a few times. I'm looking at a gecko that's crawling across the roof when he goes, "Oh shit, Ivy, look at this, what is that?" and points at this stand of reeds out in the marsh. It's something, almost incredibly tall, walking along with big, exaggerated strides, just in that one section. It had no feet from what we could see. It just looked like the stilt legs ended in a point. It had a long, deformed head shape but no face that was discernible. It just walked back and forth for a while, making these weird muttering noises. Not loud or scary, but unnatural. It walked off after a while, but we had no idea what it had been. My God, I'm glad I moved. Yet more Aussie monsters. Not exactly scary, but interesting. I woke up one day after falling asleep in the living room to see two little deformed men looking in at me, their hands pressed against the glass, smiling. They had black teeth. I was getting my mail from the mailbox once at night, and some burned-looking thing about the size of a German shepherd walked across my driveway in front of me, on all fours, grunting like a pig. It didn't even acknowledge me. I went out in the marsh during the daytime with my mates, armed with rifles and such, and saw the ground was all churned up like hundreds of animals had been walking in the mud. Some of the footprints were as big as our heads individually. I looked out my back door one morning to see a congregation of dog-like creatures far out in the field. They looked as if they had no skin, and were instead covered in cellophane. They looked up all at once and ran off towards the marsh. I saw that twitching swamp thing standing on my patio, right up against the glass door, twitching and snapping back and forth. It had no eyes, and its mouth took up the whole bottom of its face. That was when I was like, fuck it, and moved.
Canadian here. When I was really young, I would always be really afraid of the hallway outside my room at night. The setup is a small hallway at the top of the stairs, with the bathroom immediately left of the stairs, my parents' room at the other end of the hallway, and my room directly across from the top of the stairs. At night, I would sometimes be afraid of an arm, or something that I would sometimes see in the hallway, reaching through the banisters with the rest of the body or whatever the arm would be attached to down on the stairs and out of sight. I don't remember when exactly, but I did at some time stop seeing this, and I stopped being afraid of the hallway. Now I'm not sure if the whole thing had been my imagination or not. Like I said, I was really young when this occurred, but I had always believed in ghosts, since my mother told me, when I asked her about the subject, that she had seen the ghost of a girl at the top of some kind of fruit tree when she was growing up in Korea, and she would ride her bike past this tree at night on the way home from work or something, and there would sometimes be this girl sitting on top of it, and it would terrify her. The way she told me this, I believe she was telling the truth, just by the way she recounted it. When I was a teenager, a few of my friends introduced me to a haunted house. One of my friends had been shown this place by another kid he had met and had been coming back here often with more and more of our group, just to look around and hang out, because it was a decidedly cool and creepy place, but also could be a lot of fun exploring it with your friends and the girls you liked. We called it a haunted house, at first simply because it looked like one. It was abandoned for what looked like a long time. There was no evidence of a fire or anything, but much of the floor on the second story was gone. There were some holes in the walls and they appeared blackened in some places, by what I assume was rot, not smoke. The floors were wood. There was yellowish wallpaper curling up in areas on the walls. I think the only intact thing in the whole place was the toilet in the upstairs bathroom. There was a stable in the back for horses, and a well in the front, which you could see from the upstairs bathroom window. My first trip there was at night, with 8 or 9 other people. 3 of the girls wanted to wait outside because they were afraid to come in. I went with the others inside to have a look around. Other kids had been here before us, and it looked like they had intentionally tried to make it look as creepy as possible. Someone had painted on the walls generic creepy stuff like "Help us," "It's back," etc., and left a few scattered things around the place like dolls. When we went to leave, we met the girls outside and they looked at my friend who had been with me the whole while and asked how he got down so fast. They swear, from the minute he entered the place to the second he stepped out, he was standing at the window in the second floor, just staring at them. Except this window they pointed to had no floor under it on the inside, so there was no way to get to it. This house was in a pretty unusual place for a haunted house. It was at the side of a 4-lane highway, not far from a big billboard. The driveway was pretty long and you could only see the roof of the house from the road. I was out driving one night with a girl I liked, and it was late, and I was trying to keep her entertained. All the stores were closed and neither of us wanted to go to our homes, so I told her about the place and asked if she wanted to check it out. I had to park on the shoulder of the highway because it had snowed a lot and the driveway of this house was not plowed since nobody lived there. We walked up to the house and walked around the outside first. I showed her the stables and all around the outside before we went in. The snow was not freshly fallen. It had been there a few days. but the snow around this place had not been touched until we came along. I am 100% certain there were no other footprints in the snow. We went inside, and I showed her around. It is not a big house, just 4 rooms and a pantry on the ground floor, with one set of stairs leading up to the second floor, which was not just a hallway and a bathroom, and a big space with no floor. After walking around what we could upstairs, we came back down, and as I was thinking of what we should do next, we heard above us, loud and unmistakably, the sound of footsteps. The girl looked at me, and I could tell she was scared shitless, so I took her by the hand, and we ran up the driveway back to my car. I told her not to look back, and neither of us did. That night was without a doubt the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and I get seriously uncomfortable just trying to type it. I'll try to describe it as best I can. I woke up from my sleep with a horrible rotten taste in my mouth. My breath felt hot, and it stank. I went to get a drink from the kitchen, and I opened the cabinet to get a glass, and what I saw made me short of breath. This happened quickly, but there was a figure in the cabinet, like a girl in the fetal position, but propped upside down in the cabinet, so the she was resting on her head and facing to the side so that I got a side view of her. She looked like she had several feet of long, oily black hair that was wrapped round and round her head, covering her entire head in like a black cocoon. The moment I saw this, I pretty much threw myself backward, smashing my hip into the corner of the table, and as soon as I hit the table, the figure started shivering violently, like spasms, and sounded like glass and dishes clinking together. I got up and ran out of the kitchen, and the noise stopped as soon as I did. I went back to bed scared as hell and didn't sleep the rest of the night. When downstairs the next morning, my cupboard was open and my dishes were all in there as they should be, but the entire kitchen stank like rot. I asked the girl if anything had happened to her, and she said nothing had, so I didn't tell her about this. Instead, I tell /X/. I'm 23 now and left that town 3 years ago for college, but last time I went back the house was gone. The city demolished it or something. The well is still there, and I'm curious to know whether that area is still haunted or not.
There's a lot of Australians in this thread. Logical conclusion: the entire continent of Australia is haunted. Moving on. I once dated a girl who was self-destructive. She claimed she could hear voices at times, which I just thought was some kind of auditory hallucination. But once or twice, I was on the phone with her when she said she was hearing voices. Whenever she said it was talking, I would hear this odd background noise. It sounded like tapping to me, always at even intervals, and it got faster whenever I tried to talk over it. I was skeptical, but I treated it like it was a real thing and not just her fucking with me. One night I got fed up with this and started insulting this voice, saying I wanted to talk to it and that I would kick its ass. Then I heard a noise it had never made before, kind of this distorted swell of white noise that got pretty loud. This scared the hell out of me because I don't know how she could have made that noise. To this day, I still don't know if she was fucking with me. She said the voice was telling her she had to iPod herself.
When I was 12, I flew over to Sweden to visit my uncle. At the time, he was married to a woman with very wealthy parents. They had a very large 3-story mansion made of bricks. It must have been at least 200 years old. We stayed there for a night. I had no idea why, but I felt so uneasy in that house. When I had to go to the second floor to use the bathroom, I was absolutely scared and ran back downstairs to where everyone else was. When it came time for bed, my aunt's parents asked me if I wanted to stay in the spare in the second floor or their study on the third. I chose to be closer to everyone else. We all went up to the third floor. My uncle and aunt stayed in one side of the house, and I in the very middle in the study. I had long since outgrown being afraid of the dark, and I don't scare easily, but I couldn't sleep. My ears were constantly straining for noises. My eyes didn't want to close, I felt, like someone was there, very silently watching. I couldn't take it, so I dragged my mattress to my uncle and aunt's room and told them I was really homesick and didn't want to sleep alone. I didn't want them to think I was spineless. I'd been from home about a month since then, so they believed me. The next day, when we were driving to Norway, they told me something they didn't dare yesterday. They said, "You know that place is haunted?" I couldn't say a word. My aunt went on to say, "We didn't want to tell you last night because we thought you would get too scared." I asked them how they knew it was haunted, and my aunt said, "Many times when living there I saw things, and so did my parents. For instance, when my mother was doing some gardening in the front, she had a strange feeling someone was watching her, so she looked back and noticed a woman standing in the window of the study. And when my parents first moved into that house, there was an old piano in the study that they have long since gotten rid of since neither of them played. But some nights my mother swears she hears a piano playing upstairs. I've heard it once as well. I couldn't believe it. I then told them the real reason I couldn't sleep in there. I've never had an experience like that since.
About 3 years ago, I worked as a shift manager at the Pizza Hut a few towns over. It was policy to take orders up until closing, midnight at the time. We also had to wait until the oven fans turned off before we could leave, so between that and customers, sometimes we'd be stuck there until 1:30 to 2 a.m. I have to cross a railroad track just outside my neighborhood. This track is on a ridge with ravines, like moats on either side of it. It's completely wooded except on the track itself, so you have this tunnel of trees. The odd thing is, it fogs over frequently, often at night. The fog rolls down off the sides into the ravines. It looks really cool, but also kinda eerie. Anyway, I'm on my way home from one of those late closings. It's completely pitch black, and I had my windows down because it was nice out. When I rolled up to the tracks, it was doing the fog thing, so my headlights were making everything this murky white from bouncing off the fog. I decided to look both ways to make sure there wasn't a train coming, because kids used to always mess with the crossing lights control box. I looked left, then right, then snapped back left, because I'd seen a figure on the tracks and it didn't register at first. When I looked back to the right, it was still there, a black figure on a black horse. The only features I could see through the fog were the eyes of both glowing kinda dull yellow-white in the reflected light. So there I was in this tunnel of trees in this eerie white light that fades into blackness further down the tunnel, and this black figure with just eyes staring at me for a while. The horse occasionally would step in place like they do when they're impatient. The odd thing was, it didn't make any sound in the gravel. Thing was only about 10, 15 feet away, so I should have heard something. After about 2 minutes of the mutual stare, I went across the tracks, then home. It unnerved me so much that I didn't sleep for a couple of days. I told my sister about it a few days later, and she mentioned it to a British friend of hers. Her friend said it sounded like a Dulahan, which from what I understand is a messenger of death, much akin to our headless horseman from the Sleepy Hollow story. Haven't noticed anyone dying around me recently, and, in retrospect, I don't recall feeling any malice from it, so I don't know on that count.
/X/ I know how I will die. My family once had a dog. His name was Tiberius. Tiberius was getting old. He lived with us for nearly 20 years and was close to death. The thought of losing him was too much to bear, but we knew we had to be strong and continue to act normally around him, lest emotion upset him. One day while walking Tiberius through the park, he stopped and laid down. Looking back at me, he just stared. His warm, comforting stare soon turned cold and detached. His head fell limp, and Tiberius passed away. He died right in front of me. Almost in tears, I held my dead dog to me, just wanting to spend more time with my best friend. Before long, I could feel someone standing behind me. I turned around to see a sight that terrified me more than anything I've ever seen or will ever see. If I did not see it myself, I would not have believed what stood before me. Death himself stood behind me, bony hand outstretched toward Tiberius. Feeling hope rushed through my paralyzed body, I stood and ran. If I could get Tiberius away from this monster, maybe he would not be dead anymore. I can't explain my logic, but as I was facing death himself, please do not hold me responsible for fallacies in my logic. As I was running, I would turn to see if I was being followed by the monster. Eventually, I collapsed to the ground, tired from running. I just laid there, Tiberius at my side, and sobbed. The hooded monster approached and stripped Tiberius of whatever life energy we have that makes us get up and go. Then he turned to me and grasped me by my face. He showed me a scene where I was much older, being stabbed in the side and passing away on a street. This beast showed me how I would perish. I am still unsure of whether this was a curse or a gift granted to me by death. But either way, I will die on December 13th, 2024. Goodbye and good night /X/.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.